All right, it is Friday, time for SIP episode 74. 74, and as everyone knows by now, we like to begin the episodes with famous Chicago Bears numbered 74. So I know our guest probably knows a couple, but I'm going to go with Jimbo Covert, the most famous Chicago Bear that's numbered 74. I think Jimbo was 74. Huge episode tonight because we are going to educate you, entertain you, and engage you in several cooking methods from good friends. John Laloganes and Chef Wook are back on the program tonight. You can get a glimpse of them right now working diligently in the green room. We put a camera in the green room. So I want to welcome Alyssa Nelson, Hans and Caitlin Greasy, Ivy, Jeff and Jane Greasy, Jim Brubaker, Catherine Jerica. So good to see you, Linda Forsyth, Lori Potme, who has won a ton of money in the last several SIP episodes, Mark Shalinor, Peter Glick is in the house, and we're going to get started in a second because this is going to be a jam-packed episode because there's just so much to cover as it relates to cooking methods, especially as we come into the holiday season. But I do want to let everybody know about a couple special announcements. First of all, Wine Club members, you have been knocking it out of the park. You guys are just so special. The minute Wine Club is released, we know within 6 to 10 days when those shipments start hitting the doors, repeat orders start coming in, and you guys knocked it out of the park with hoops. I think there might be 3 or 4 bottles left. So if you want to reorder something from Hoops, you need to get on that fast. Secondly, big announcement in the SIP kit. So the SIP kit, many of you are drinking tonight's Syrah that John and Chef Wook have been pairing some things with, and will be telling us that in a second. But you were able to achieve getting that bottle in advance by getting the SIP kit. So I want to point out that there is going to be a BV7, Bottega del Vino 7 wine stem in the current SIP kit. So if you don't have this fantastic wine stem, all you have to do is order a SIP kit. You'll get one in the SIP kit, and then you will be set up for an episode that we have coming up in a few weeks where we have the general manager or part owner of Bottega del Vino giving us an in-service doing wine tasting and stems and the stem selection and how it can impact your wine. Because as their saying says, if the wine matters, so does the glass. So that is going to be a ton of fun. But tonight we are going to be joined by, or are joined by, John Laloganes and Chef Wook, and they are going to be talking about, as I said, cooking methods, braising meat, stews, but also they have an incredibly popular podcast called Feeding the Soul. And I want to share with you a little bit about that.
Feeding the Soul is a podcast that explores the culture and cultural differences associated with food and drink. Food and drink feeds the soul, and they serve as the single greatest unifiers across cultures that work to bridge the differences among each of us. We believe that feeding the body is how we survive, but feeding our soul allows us to thrive. So, what feeds your soul?
And I'm not certain that creepy little Halloween.
That was accident. Wook came back from plating the food and accidentally, boom.
That's right. I figured it would be a good sound effect, you know?
It was an awesome sound effect. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, John Laloganes and Chef Wook, welcome back to the program. Cheers, all.
Cheers.
Hey, everyone.
So we're going to get into it tonight. Jeff and Jane Greasy on an epic tour in California, hitting winery after winery, are in the house, which is amazing. Marilyn, I see, is Marilyn Manning. The Hoops was yummy. Cooking right now, we're going to transition to cooking because this is what it's all about. As we hit OND, October, November, December, wine sales start picking up, but so does the turning indoors for different cooking methodologies with regards to how am I going to prepare everything that's coming down the pipe. So we've got, of course, Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and entertaining and dinner parties and people coming over impromptu. So I want to talk to John and Chef about kind of some of what we're going to talk about this evening, high level braising and stew. So who wants to take it away? One of you two giving us a high level overview of what braising is and stewing.
Sure. Well, I'm going to start it off. And we wanted to really just kind of introduce and say that as seasons change, so does our appetite. The last time we were on the show here on Cellar Angels, we talked about grilling And what are we talking about? Smoking, right?
Mhm.
Grilling and smoking. Great kind of summertime cooking methods, outdoors. Well, things are changing, obviously. Well, I should say, if we're not in Florida, things are changing. Things are certainly changing in Chicago and Wisconsin and the overall Midwest. So our appetite changes. We naturally crave comfort food that is warm, hearty, slow cooked, full of flavor. And it's fall time. Fall time is all about long and slow cooking, which makes stewing and braising the ultimate cooler weather kind of antidote.
Here, here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's kind of, you're right, because obviously in Florida, we don't have the changes of the seasons as dramatic as you have down there, or as Doug Rutherford has in Minnesota, Jim Brubaker has in Colorado, and Peter Glick in Chicago, Maryland and Colorado. We miss the leaves changing, but you tend to move inside. You tend to start slowing down and basically cocooning for the winter. And so this is football weather. It's Saturday afternoon, putting something on the stove weather, maybe doing some prep in the kitchen. But you're right. It's all about going and chilling, if you will, and relaxing. And braising and stewing allow you to do that and still produce incredible meals.
Oh,
So
yeah.
how did, go ahead, Jeff.
Oh, I was going to say that, most people, when we look at braising, they usually always think of meats. And when it comes to the cuts of meat that require a little extra coaxing, both stewing and braising can definitely make tougher cuts like ribs, shanks, briskets, and round. Very tender, tender enough to slice with your fork.
Tender like Wook's voice as well, for those that saw the advertisement.
Tender like Wook's heart. He's very tender.
Oh, my tender heart as it melts.
Yeah. So what we wanted to do was talk about the sort of introductory difference between braising and stewing, and really discuss how it's all about the liquid and the size of the cut of the meat. And those are really kind of two foundational elements that distinguish braising from stewing and stewing from braising. And, so it's largely all about the cut of the meat and the amount of liquid. Either method is all about the one pot kind of wonder, the one pot cooking. Some of us can maybe recall back. I certainly, from my childhood, mom would throw stuff in a big pot and it would just sit there all day long. And she probably didn't know what she was doing, but what she was doing was taking tough cut of meat, a lot of liquid, slow and low cooking, and just that smells permeating the house. So, it's all about both methods. Braises and stewing is about cooking low and slow and using moisture to cook your food.
Is when you say it's all about the cut of the meat, are you talking about specifically the size or the type of meat? Or
It's the type of meat. Okay. And usually with the size, like John was saying, that's going to help you determine whether it is going to be braised or a stew. Because typically when you're making stews, the meat is cut into smallish, uniform chunks. Whereas when you're braising, the muscles are usually left whole. So think of like a lamb shank that's going to be left whole. I mean, certainly you can take it off the bone and make it into small cubes. But when you're braising, it's usually bigger cuts or pieces of meat that have bone. And braising for larger cuts of meat like beef cheeks, shanks, short ribs, those are the things that you're usually going to braise. Whereas when you're stewing, you'll definitely want to cut it into smaller, because even though it is the same technique, you still want to make sure that things are uniform in size. Typically they're cubed, and it's the key to stewing that the meat is totally immersed in the liquid. And when you look at both processes, it does involve the lid being on the pot, which is very, very key. And stewing would normally take place on the stovetop, and braising will typically be transferred to the oven. And one of the big reasons why is really because you want that even heat for that bigger piece of meat.
Okay, so it's interesting. So in braising, the meat is never 100% submerged.
Mm-hmm.
In stew, it usually is. The stew has got uniform chunks, maybe a little bit bigger than bite size. So when they get done and cooked down, you actually still have to cut them in half, or maybe my bite sizes, it'd be okay.
Right.
And then, but you said it's important that the lid is always on.
Yeah, the lid, it has to be on really because of how it's going to not only concentrate the flavor, but it almost kind of steams everything. And because of that, it's really going to break down all the connective tissues with a tough piece of meat.
And
so,
what are average cooking times, if you will, and temperatures?
Low and slow, baby. So when you're looking at a braise, let's just say I want to braise short ribs. And it really just depends on the type of cut of meat that you're going to use. So whether it's a piece of beef, maybe a piece of pork, or perhaps even chicken, they're all going to cook differently. But the technique really doesn't change. It's really you understanding how the connective tissue is going to break down. And that might take a little trial and error. So I'll just kind of give you a rough estimate. If it's chicken, it's probably going to be about an hour if you're going to braise the legs and thighs. And if you're going to braise like a pork shoulder, a smaller piece, it might take you about 2 hours. And if you're breaking down connective tissues for a short rib, depending on the size of the short rib, because you can buy them in different styles, it's going to take anywhere between 2 to 3 hours. If it's a larger short rib, it might even take you 4.
And do you know in advance what the temperature of the broth should be? And if you need to get it into a certain range, how are you measuring that?
We were going to mention that a little bit later, but just a sneak preview, you never want the temperature of the liquid to be boiling.
Right.
You really want the process to be lower temperatures because it's really going to help you break down the connective tissues a lot more evenly. And that's really a key part. When you're looking at the benefits of the stewing and the braising, one is just cost. The cuts of meat are typically less expensive per pound than your steaks and chops. And when you're stewing and braising, it's very, very efficient. You look at what John was mentioning with his mom and what she would do. And think about it, it's just a one pot stop. You put everything in there and in a way you kind of did everything. Your mise en place, your prep, if you will, do some initial work and let it cook. You go work, you do some chores. Basically, you just set it and forget it. And,
well,
and then the third benefit, which is actually my favorite, is the whole smell.
I was going to say the aromas for 10 hours.
Yeah. So like being outside, raking leaves or, putting backyard furniture away, doing kind of that last minute stuff before winter comes, the smell of the braised stew fills the home. It's so tempting. It's so warming.
That's right.
It is, for me, evocative of my childhood. So,
and did your mom use like soup starter out of that tall can? Like, so that was only my mom. You guys are all lying.
No, I think I won't say anything in case she's on.
That's a smart move.
So there's no point in braising Wagyu, is there?
You know what? There is and there isn't, right? If you're getting a tougher cut, Wagyu is naturally going to be very, very high in fat, which is going to give you the flavor. But if you have Wagyu short ribs, you can braise it. It just won't take as long. It is fairly tender in the sense that you have a lot of marbling that's going to provide a lot of flavor, but it's still a short rib. So you still need to cook it for a decent amount of time if you want to truly get that mouth-watering, melting in your mouth effect.
Awesome. And thank you, Lori, for the honesty. I appreciate that. She remembers her mom using soup starter. There have been a lot of technological advances in cooking devices, and you have that Instapot. And so is there a tried and true pro con between Instapot, stovetop, and braising in the oven?
You know what, for me, and I can only speak for myself and maybe the people that I've spoken to about this, I actually had a conversation with fellow chefs about this, not too far off. We all really appreciate the Instapot. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just pressurized cooking. It does the job. Now, there might be some things that's not possible, but you can always do it later. I mean, if you're thinking about, for instance, a sauce, you can fix it later. And I think it really just depends on your comfort level and also your familiarity with the equipment. If you're intimidated by an Instapot, by all means, go the oven route. I mean, there's a lot of people that will never change. But I think for those that are curious and they are up for the challenge, the Instapot's fantastic. I did something a couple of years ago. I made macaroni and cheese in an Instapot. Can I tell you, it was actually pretty darn good. And it was just, you put everything in there and you call it a day, and you can take it out and you can just broil the top with some toppings if you want. 10 minutes.
That does actually sound pretty good. Speaking of instant creativity, let's go to a poll question. So this first poll question might actually have been written incorrectly because we might be launching all 3 poll questions at once. So I apologize for that. So,
whoops.
oh, that's not the one. We'll start with that one. And Doug Rutherford, I did get your email. So I appreciate that. Regarding start time for SIP, as we move into a new year, several folks have wondered if they could do it earlier, later. So I just wanted to get a quick feedback. And if you answered the poll via email, you don't have to answer here, unless, of course, you're from Illinois, because we know everyone in Illinois likes to vote more than once.
Vote early and vote often.
Vote early and often. That's what we say. All right. I don't know why question 3 came. So, all right. So it's all over the board, but most of it is same time. So let's end that poll. You don't need to share the results. Let's try this poll. Much better. When did braising meat first appear?
Now that's a tough question.
1750, when the Scots were looking for assistance with haggis. 1850s France. 1500s Spain for wild boar.
I should have said, now that's a tough cut of meat.
And Chef and John, we're not privy to these questions ahead of time. So, all right, we're gonna move on. Interestingly enough, what did you just say, Chef?
I said the first one, the haggis, assistance with haggis.
It's not. I just made that up because haggis needs assistance.
1850s France.
The answer is, in fact, 1850s France, because braising is a French term meaning hot coals. So that was interesting. And we'll do the last poll question.
Yeah, that was very creative.
Thank you.
The haggis.
Smoking meat is a form of braising. True or false? Hello. Look at all the answers change. It's still 50-50. And it is low and slow, but why isn't it? What's the answer, Chef?
It's because of the amount of liquid. They both have very similar properties, low and slow, low temperature, but it's really the amount of liquid that's really going to dictate the difference between smoking and then your braising.
So it's not necessarily a form.
Exactly.
It's a different cooking method.
It's a totally different cooking method. Okay, so smoking is smoking, braising involves liquid, but just the similarities is that they're both low and slow.
Correct.
And when you talk about the broth in the braising not being a boil, is it a simmer or is it just a barely rippling?
So it's definitely going to be a simmer. I mean, it's all about the time. Don't boil the meat thinking you'll be smart and cut down on the cooking time. And this may speed up the process, but you're going to have too much fat. It's going to dissolve. And the protein fibers will actually toughen up and dry out, believe it or not, because with that low and slow temperature and the cooking time, it'll really allows the muscles to break down. And if you try to speed it up, it's actually going to toughen because of the high heat. And so once you let the muscles relax, that's when everything breaks down. And that's when it truly becomes enjoyable because it's very soft.
You know, we came up with 5 tips. We were brainstorming. Okay, what's most critical bits of advice to give people that are going to braise or stew, and really kind of taking it from good to great. So we do have 5 tips if you want to hear them.
I do. Start with number 1.
We just did.
That was time.
Time.
Don't boil it. Don't think like, boil it, get it done quicker. That's going to toughen your meats.
Are these in order of importance or just random?
No.
In no chronological order.
Okay. So the first one is time. You can't hack this by cooking it at a higher temperature and think you're going to shortcut the process. Got it. Okay.
A lot of people think that.
Right.
Next one is brown. And people sometimes, again, undercut the value and the importance of this, but always brown your meat and or vegetables sufficiently as a first step. So you want to definitely brown. You develop and caramelize the vegetable meat. Almost has a slightly burnt appearance, but it's not burnt. And it's going to add a deeper flavor throughout that long, slow cooking process.
Okay. Is browning different than searing?
They're the same.
Yeah.
Okay. So you're talking about like maybe throwing this large cut of meat into a cast iron skillet, get it seared on all sides and brown and get the nice crumbles on the cast iron surface. Perfect. That is a step I have often overlooked unintentionally and just skipped.
And I've actually seen a lot of people maybe make this attempt, but under brown. They think, oh, it's enough, or they don't brown on all sides. They brown one side or two sides. So give it time to brown. That takes a little time to develop. And like that little effort and moment of love is going to pay off big dividends in the end.
Absolutely.
I like it. Number 3.
Deglaze. Deglaze your pot with the braising liquid. So once your meat and your veg is done being seared and browned, you want to add the liquid. And so typically it's going to be deglazed with some sort of acid. So wine is perfect. And then you can also add additional water. You can also add the stock. I mean, you will need to for the sauce, but you want to start with the wine first. If you didn't have wine on hand, water is perfectly fine, but you're not going to get that acidity from the wine for your sauce. And then begin stirring. And you're going to really start scraping up any of the brown bits, the fond or the souks, the juices. And those bits are really the flavor bomb. And that's really what you want. And when they're dissolved in the cooking, more so the cooking liquid, they really enrich the entire dish. And, you know, if you wanted to add one more element to kind of provide a little bit of brightness, it's another acid, actually. So once you're browning the vegetables, it's always a nice trick to add just a little bit of tomato paste. And that really deepens the flavor. It aids in the browning. So as soon as you add that wine, you're going to notice this big transformation in your sauce.
So hang on. So not bacon. Got to cross that out.
And what we used for deglazing the dish that we're going to show you all later was the wine that you're actually drinking at home and the wine that we're drinking here, which is so great of Goose Cross to provide us and Cellar Angels to provide us with a couple bottles here. So we used about half of one in cooking, and the rest of it is for enjoying right now. So that was that acid. I mean, people can add water to deglaze, but it's kind of like pointless in my world because like, let's bring flavor into the dish and intensity and almost like layers. And so you bring in stock, you bring in wine, a little bit of tomato paste.
And we could do a whole episode just on stocks. And I'd be curious, both of you, and I'll go to you first, John. How often do you make your own stocks?
Rarely.
Chef?
I only make it because of my profession. And just because of what it is needed at the work. At home, maybe twice a year.
Oh, really?
Yeah, really only because
we're at school where we have stock. So
well, that's a good point.
You know, that's kind of the thought.
Well, it is.
When we go home, it's like fried chicken and French fries.
Right. And mac and cheese in the Instapot.
Yeah, right. You know, because we're eating all the fine dining food all day long.
Right.
Like, wah, wah, so sad. All right.
Yeah.
Someone's got to do it.
Years ago, the chief operating angel and I read one of Charlie Trotter's early cookbooks, and he basically said, I never cook without stock. And so we made a whole bunch of his stocks. And it was, to say it upped the dish is an understatement. It was crazy good. But you both know that is a labor of freaking love. Those things take time. But then we got geeky. We were taking our stocks with us. But okay. So
the
stocks
beautiful thing though, if you're making stock, not only do you refrigerate it, you throw some in the freezer and you can put them in ice cube trays and use it and bring it out when you need it. So while it takes a lot of time to make your own stock, if you make enough of it, you can put it away and bring it out as you need it. So you're not making it like every day or every week or whatever.
Smart. I like that. All right. Number 4,
day ahead. Make it a day ahead. Your meat, try cooking, say ribs, as we have a short rib, a boneless short rib. Try cooking it a day before serving. Braised dishes and stews. I don't know how you all feel about this, but we're pretty adamant about things, and you can throw soups in there to some degree, seem to get better the next day. You know, flavors, aromas, textures, everything just kind of combines and integrates better. And it also gives you a chance to defat the sauce. If you let it cool completely, you can scoop off or skim
Scrape
off
off.
the fat
Oh, yeah.
much easier.
That's a nice little tip you added, John.
Mm.
Making it sure that you can remove the fat, because that's a big difference maker in the sauce.
And so while you're stewing and you have all the fat on the top during, you pull it out of the oven, you are just checking it. Do you skim that fat off?
Oh yeah, I mean, especially when you need to finish your sauce. So if your
Okay.
meat is ready, your protein is ready, you pull it out of the oven or the stovetop, you're going to notice that there's going to be, depending on the cut of meat, especially with short ribs, you'll notice a big layer of fat.
Right.
And if you try to do it hot, it's not impossible, but you're going to notice that it's not completely free of it. So,
Correct.
I mean, it's a great restaurant tip and trick. Chefs will make it the day before. It gives them the opportunity to really remove the fat. And so that really is going to allow you to have this really nice, luxurious sauce that tastes clean. Now, what you can do is after you're finished and you're ready to serve it, you can add additional fat to it. But this fat is not really going to be emulsified in the sauce because it's all on the top. So chefs will typically emulsify, finish the sauce with a little bit of butter, but they wouldn't necessarily use the fat of the beef that was just there because it's so hot, it's just not going to be emulsified together.
It's going to look
Right.
green on
Yes.
the plate. It's going to look sloppy.
So if I'm skimming the fat while it's hot,
Mhm.
I'm not necessarily going to adversely affect the sauce. I just won't get all the fat because until it's solid and congeals and it's much
Right.
easier to scrape it off. Okay.
And you have to find the right temperature to add the fat back in. Because if the sauce is boiling and you're adding in fat, just like John said, it's going to separate, it's going to look greasy, and you might enjoy it, but just from a visual perspective, it's going to look pretty bad.
I like it. Dan Gretsch, or Dan is a first timer who is just joining this evening. So welcome, Dan. Alyssa, thank you for the order. And for those of you that are just joining, I forgot to mention this earlier, and I'm going to go back to this share screen. Cellar Angels, for your own knowledge, is a wine curator. So we are a direct-to-consumer wine company that curates wines exclusively from Napa and Sonoma. So you can go to the Cellar Angels website, cellarangels.com. We've got 3 different wine clubs. You can shop wines by red, whites, rosé, sparkling, the kits, all of the club wines that might still be available. But as you get to the red wines, if you are looking for something specific, maybe you only want to see Merlot, you can just search by varietal and just scroll down to Merlot, and it will bring up all 3 Merlots that are currently on the site. So if you are driven by varietal, if you're driven by location, you can select the region, Napa, Mendo, or Sonoma. Everything should be there. It should be very user-friendly and very fast. The sip kit is a very, very popular item because it allows you to get 4 wines in advance of each Friday's event. And so now you can sit back with folks like John and Chef Wook and learn and sip on the same wine that they're sipping. So did we get to number 5?
We're ready for 5. Are you ready for 5? We drum roll? No drum roll yet, right?
I feel like Letterman.
Right. Well, you look a little bit like Dave. You're more handsome.
Right. I have more hair, barely.
So the 5th step, or the 5th tip, I should say, not step, tip, is finishing. It's adding a final flourish, if you will, to brighten, boost, or add texture to the dish.
Mhm.
So chef has a few suggestions or ideas on what you can do to add as a sort of finishing agent to your braise or stew.
Thanks, John.
Okay, wait, before you do that, Chef, walk through the sequencing of this, because let's say you made it a day in advance, you skimmed off the fat.
Yes.
So now you get your braised meat and liquid that's in the fridge, you pull it out, you let that, come up to room temp.
Mhm.
Then you're going to put in, you said, an additional fat, maybe butter or something like that, or an emulsifier.
So this is what you want to do. So once you've done the steps that you've just mentioned, as soon as you pull it out of refrigeration, you can put it directly on the heat.
Okay.
And that's where you have to use your judgment, because your meat might be ready, but your liquid might be almost too watery. So you might have to reduce the sauce first before you add the protein back in.
And how do you do that?
You just put the liquid in a pot just by itself, and that you can allow to boil. And that you want to
Okay.
reduce and just reduce off the excess water. Because with the braise, you're usually going to have some sort of thickening agents. Tomato paste is one of them, but a lot of times these stews have flours and other types of starches to help thicken. But once you do that and you like the way that the sauce is going, then you can add the protein back in so that everything can finish at the same time.
Got
And
it. So
when
you
you
pull
add the
that.
meat back in, you gotta have to lower your flame though, so it doesn't toughen it up.
Interesting. So you pull the dish out of the refrigerator from the flavors all conjoining overnight. You take the protein out, you put the liquid on the stove, high heat, bring that to a boil, reduce that and put the protein back in and let them all marinate again.
Yes. And then so as you're doing that, to give it a nice extra element like John was talking about, fresh herbs are always a key product. It really adds a lot of freshness to something that's very heavy. So even something very simple like parsley, it really does the trick. If you wanted an intense flavor, like if you were braising lamb, rosemary, mint, even cilantro, it adds a lot of color and freshness. Grated citrus zest, and really any squeeze of juice. I mean, it really gives such a big, bright note. And I think John wants to maybe finish it off.
Yeah, because when I do stews, braise, or even soups, I like to add a splash of vinegar, whether it's apple cider vinegar,
I was
maybe.
just going to ask that.
Yeah, maybe even balsamic. There's a store in Chicago. There's one in Evanston as well. They have two outlets called Old Town Oil. And in Chicago, they're located on Wells Street. And it's kind of an amazing place to go experience all these different styles and flavors of different oils. So you can go there, pick an oil up and vinegars. And they have Old Town oils and vinegars, right? And you can pick up any kind of flavor you want and utilize that, not just for the typical salad dressing, but actually as a finishing agent to your stews and braise or soups.
And if you're not going to use an incredible bottle of wine from Cellar Angels to deglaze, what cheap wine can you get from Trader Joe's?
$2 shot.
I'm sorry, we shouldn't have said Trader Joe's by name. Okay, I apologize. What cheap bottle of wine can we use? I mean, does anything like, could you get like a $5 bottle of wine and it not harm the meal, or is there a worry here?
Well, we've talked about this in the past a little bit in our, I think, a show that we did about a year ago, the Thanksgiving episode with y'all. And we talked about, Chef and I maybe have a slight disagreement on it. And typically in culinary, in restaurants and kitchens, even in school, they kind of get the cheapest wine possible. So like you want a red wine, we're getting a cheap red wine. We get a white wine, we're getting the cheapest white wine. And I disagree with that from the standpoint that it's no different than the protein or the vegetables. The quality of the ingredients are really important. And if you're starting with a really cheap bottle of wine, it's possibly overly sweet. It's probably lacking acid. It's probably lacking a lot of things, and it's going to intensify. So what you're going to intensify is a lot of fruitiness and a lot of sweetness. And then you have to make adjustments, because is your goal to have a finished sweet sauce? I don't think so. So I would suggest to you, maybe we're not using goose cross. Maybe not. I mean, it would be nice if money is no object. And, what do they do? Only 200 cases. Like if the wine was unlimited in quantity of production. But what I would do is go to the store and get another wine of the same or similar varietal that I'm going to be using, that I'm going to be drinking, and something that's a little bit more in the maybe $10 to $15 price point, as opposed to the $2, $3, $4, $5, $8 price point. So if you have a little more money, I believe it's going to pay off dividends in the end, because it's going to be less overt sweetness that you're going to have to kind of adjust with other ingredients.
Right. So in this particular instance, yeah, the Goose Cross Syrah is, I think, around $40, $41. So you could very easily go find a $10 to $15 Syrah that is going to be, it's not going to be this one, but it also isn't going to be a $3 Syrah or a $4 Syrah that is just horrible. I think that's a fair point. All right, it's that time of the show that if you want to turn your cameras on and let these two young gentlemen see you in person. All of us have nice shirts on. None of us have pants on. And so it's just something that they tell me they like to cook like that. But Denise is going to elevate everybody to a panelist, and I am going to go to Google Earth and show you a little bit about where this wine comes from. All right, so you can see Google Earth, and I'm interested in what's happening with Google because I already see someone called Google. They're missing borders on most of the United States, and that's probably going to impact things. So for those of you that are new, we focus on one wine region in the world, and it's Napa and Sonoma. So see, my county lines aren't there. Google, I promise you, this is their downfall. How much are we paying for Google? Oh, zero. Okay, that's a fair deal then. So this is Napa County right here. This is Sonoma County right here. It goes all the way up to past Sea Ranch. But as I tell people when we travel and when we teach about wine and discuss things, there is a significant maritime influence. There's water everywhere in the Napa Sonoma region. And the other two major things that this region has going for it is one, it's a Mediterranean climate. There's about 2.83% of the world that is a Mediterranean climate. The other thing it has going for it, it has 55 different soil types. Out of the 11 different soils, not species, but out of the soil types, there's 55 within those subtypes. Napa and Sonoma have 55 of them. I mean, it's incredible the diversification that these two valleys and counties have. Huge amounts of volcanic activity. And there's Mount George is going to factor into the Syrah because Mount George blew its top about 1 million years ago. And this is all volcanic rock down in the Coombsville area. And that has a giant influence on drainage. It has a giant influence on nutrient retention for the vines. So all of that comes into play. So the vineyard that we're talking about where this Syrah comes from is just outside of the town of Napa. And it's a tiny little family-owned vineyard that has Syrah here and Cabernet here. And so you can imagine a vineyard block of this size in this person's home. Here's their house, here's their pool, and here's their vineyard. So this is really one of those gentleman farmer scenarios because this is not going to produce a lot of crop. They aren't going to get rich off of this. So they sublet this out to people like Christy Coors from Goose Cross to contract for the Syrah and then produce the Syrah. Goose Cross, the winery, is a little bit up valley from here. So it's interesting because here's a great view of Napa. There's Goose Cross up there. So as you move from the town of Napa through the Oak Knoll district, Yountville, Oakville, Rutherford, Zinfandel, and St. Helena, you can see that Goose Cross is almost right in the middle. And as we get closer, you can see that it's literally on the valley floor, tucked right on either side. You've got the Mayacamas and the Vaca Mountains. These are the Vaca, the Mayacamas are on the other side, but it's sitting here beautiful right in the floor. And I do want to show a couple different things because many of you have probably driven right past this winery and not known it. So here's a winery called Cliff Ledy. And if you've been to Cliff Ledy, you are literally across the street from Goose Cross. Here's a very, very high-end Cabernet producer called Capscandy Family Winery, a couple $100 a bottle. You drive right past this house coming into Goose Cross, and their winery is right here. Beautiful outdoor venue. Here's a great winery called Entryway. I'm sorry, that's just an entryway. That was my mistake. It's just really how to get into the house. Paradise is how I've named Goose Cross because when you're sitting here, you can just really get lost in the beauty of this location. And I'm just going to pan out so you can see across the valley floor. You're just sitting here out on the back patio and you're in the vineyards because they actually cut out the vineyards here to put a tasting platform out here. There's umbrellas and it really is a special place, especially now in fall with the vines full. And it's just north of Yountville, which is in my book one of the gastronomic meccas of the world, because there's just, I think, three-star Michelin restaurants in Yountville now: Thomas Keller and the French Laundry and Ad Hoc and Bouchon, Bistro Gentil. I mean, there's just so many good places to eat in Yountville. And here you are, less than a half a mile away. You can be sitting out here and drinking this Syrah, among other things, because they have a very deep portfolio, but it's a pretty nice place to taste. So if you get out to the Valley, we are happy to set you up here. And by the way, Goose Cross is a winery near and dear to our heart, because they are 100% direct to consumer. You will not find these wines in restaurants. You will not find these wines on a retail shelf at Bevmo or Total Wines or anything like that. They don't do any distribution. So it's all direct from the winery and or Cellar Angels, which we're excited about. Cool spot, great Syrah. And that is essentially, it's a beautiful and very peaceful there, especially in the morning. Doug Rutherford was there. I forgot about that. It is just a wonderful place. So now let's get back to braising. We've talked about stewing. We've talked on a little bit, but I'd like to have John, if you give me a wine assessment on the Syrah.
Yeah. Well, I did make some notes on the Syrah. So this is, first off, kind of starting out, since we're doing braising stewing, if I could say there's like a preference of categories of wines to first pair with braising and stewing meats, I'd use big, broad categories. First one being mellow and complex reds, the second one being bold and intense reds. And using these categories, otherwise known as wine styling, which I do write about in my book, and I talk about the idea of making sense of all the different grape varietals out there by utilizing broad categories as a way to make sense for the consumer, but also for servers and sommeliers in restaurants. Syrah is one such varietal that falls in the bold and intense reds, as does Cabernet Sauvignon, as does Zinfandel, as does Nebbiolo, as does a few others. Syrah is one of my personal favorite varietals on the sort of bigger end and the bigger side. This Syrah is no different. It really showcases what we would call typicity, which is your word of the week, I believe, with your email that you sent out. Typicity.
Very good.
Is a word that I use every day. Changing my socks and throwing
What's
out
your
the word
typicity?
You got it. So typicity is basically in essence, is a wine is showing us what it's supposed to show us. A wine is recognizable in terms of how we understand that wine. And broadly speaking, the typicity of a Syrah is showing black, dark fruit. And when you smell the wine, and very typical of a Syrah, is going to showcase black fruit, blackberry fruit. It might be really like blackberry jam. It might be blackberry kind of dried fruits, but that blackberry darker fruit tends to be there. In addition, one of the markers that we use in wine education is typicity, and talking about Syrah's black dark fruit, blackberry jam, but also bacon fat. Kind of the smokiness, because Syrah is always going to see barrel aging, and usually a pretty good healthy percentage of new oak. So this particular wine, Goose Cross, was aged for 14 months, which is a really healthy dose of time. 40% of the wood was new. So you're going to bring in this toasty smokiness, hence the whole typicity of Syrah of bacon fat. And in addition to blackberry fruit, in addition to this bacon fat, there's always a healthy dose of baking spices. So you can bring in elements of clove and cardamom, as well as baking sauces. Like you might pick up on some vanilla, right? Well, that would make sense because you've got an oak barrel that this thing has been sitting in for 14 months. On the other side, we get more like savory characteristics. And it kind of hooks up with some of that bacon fat. You get a little bit of earthy character. And you can have some tobacco and a little bit of leather in there as well. So I love Syrah and I love Cabernet Sauvignon, but I err towards Syrah. And both are going to get you where you're going if you're doing some beef stewed, or braised, and might be more in the element of braised beef here. Syrahs and cabs are incredible companions, but it's like a great alternative, right? They're both bold and intense reds. And if you're having cab every night of the week and you're like, I need a break, I want something different, I want to open my mind to something new, Goose Cross Syrah is a great companion. You know, this thing is 96% Syrah. It's got a little bit of Petite Syrah that's going to give you a little bit more earthiness and a little bit more tannin structure. It's a beautiful wine and very small production, I might add.
Yeah, and you're right. The tannins are there. They just aren't powerful. I mean, they're softer. They're well balanced. I've been in love with this Syrah since we tasted it a couple of years ago, but I'm glad. I appreciate the assessment, especially the comparison and contrasting with things that you should be braising in and stews.
Yeah, and I want to add one thing. What you're selling, what you're offering is a 2016. You know, we're at 221, verging 222. There's some age on this. And one of the criticisms I have, if there is a criticism out there, is that we drink our reds, our bold and intense reds, and our mellow and complex reds way too young. And sometimes because, you know, I don't have the willpower. So when I buy wines and I collect wines, I ship them off to another part of the state. So they're somewhere sitting in a basement, nice conditions. So I don't have access to them because I don't trust myself. So the fact that we can get this thing and it's already 5+ years old, that's awesome. Because as you all know, as a red wine ages and bottle ages, it evolves and it becomes more complex, and all of the tannin structure sort of softens up a bit. And, you know, that's exactly what you described. The tannin is present, the tannin is there, but it's so balanced at this point. Like this wine, certainly you could age it longer, but I'd say drink it now, drink it this fall time, drink it this winter time, you know, make a stew, make a braise, and have some goose cross. It's good stuff.
It sounds like a plan as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
Chef, as far as, go ahead.
And that's okay. And that's what we have. Do you want to see our dish that we actually prepared for Cellar Angels?
I do. It was, did you go with the mac and cheese with the Syrah broth?
Actually, just a touch lower, you know.
Let's see what you got. Lay it on us. Walk us through what you decided to menu, you know, oh, hey, hello, pictures.
So John and I were collaborating on what is the best dish for this, meaning today. And we came up with the idea of, based on everything that we were talking about and brainstorming, we did the braised short rib, and that's sitting on top of creamy mashed potatoes, pomme puree. And there is also roasted carrots. And then there's also a blend of roasted mushrooms. And we do have some fresh herbs. We have some micro arugula. So it's going to add just a little bit of hint of spice. And of course, the lovely red wine sauce that's going to be part of the braising liquid. No butter on this one.
Okay, so you're going to have to, two things. One, you're going to have to cut into that so we can see what that bad boy looks like. That's a great shot right there, especially with the carrots, very autumnal with the carrot cubes. And you talked about a medley of some fresh mushrooms.
Mm-hmm.
What mushrooms do you have there?
So I have shiitakes. I also have a little bit of the oyster mushrooms, and I also have beech mushrooms.
What was the last one?
Beech, Beech.
Interesting. And I would imagine, John, that the earthiness of those mushrooms complements the Syrah beautifully.
Yeah. So there's, you know, on a couple talking points regarding that. Beef ribs, as this is a short rib, boneless short rib. All right. So this is beef. It's rich, it's hearty, and it's naturally earthy, especially when you're adding in that really good sear that chef did in the beginning. So you've got this earthy character, right? With beef, I like bold, intense reds. If we were doing some sort of braised pork butt or something, I would go with something more like a mellow, complex red, more like a Tempranillo, Sangiovese, some alternative reds. When you're bringing in your sauce, the sauce adds a little bit of fruitiness. All right. And we use the Syrah, which has that blackberry fruit. So there's a little bit of fruitiness going on. It's not sweet, but it's this fruit. So what you have is this beautiful kind of harmonious connection of the earthiness from the meat. You're bringing earthiness from the root vegetables, the carrots, earthiness from the mushrooms, creaminess, richness, fattiness from the potatoes. And then this sauce is giving you this fruitiness, but also there's a savory element to it. So it's like really deep, but fruit is coming out. It's all about harmony. And so you don't want just earth, 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 earth. I mean, there's of course nothing wrong with that, but we always try to find some sort of counterpoints, right? Counterpoints. And that's what you're getting by bringing in this addition of the sauce.
Otherwise, I mean, earth, 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 it sounds like a dead show. I've been to those. There's a lot of earth there. I'm curious about the prep time here, chef, with regards to, a day ahead of time. Did you do anything a day ahead of time? What was the size of the meat before that you purchased?
It wasn't too big. I mean, it was about a pound. It was a pound of meat. I did cut it so then it fits the pot that I have at home. And, it did take about 2 hours. If you're, depending on what your speed and what your proficiency level is in your home kitchen. I mean, you cutting up a vegetable like onions, carrots, celery. I mean, it doesn't take too long. And, we're not serving those vegetables with it. So those are all just strained out. So it doesn't really matter how they're cut. But the browning, the vegetables, I mean, and the prep itself was about 15, 20 minutes.
Well, that's not terrible.
Yeah, it's not terrible at all.
But that's chef doing it. So keep that in mind. Chef is a trained professional.
Oh, trust me. I've added 45 minutes to every single one of his prep times. I could not a chance I'm making that dish in 3 weeks.
And so the cooking time itself was about 2 hours.
Okay. And cooking time so now we're going to have it. Ooh, that looks good. Very nice. Kind of hungry. So was that, you seared it, deglazed, braised. What your broth was? Part red wine, vegetables, spices,
and then a veal stock or brown stock.
And a veal stock.
I would say for a dish and a preparation like this, I think you don't want to skimp out, and you really want to use quality. I hate to say it because I know it's an inconvenience for a lot of people. You want to use a homemade stock for this. If you were to buy canned broth, it's not going to do the trick. There's not enough collagen or gelatin in that, specifically the canned broth. And that's not going to give you any body to your sauce. And so if you were to do that, there's nothing wrong with adding a little flour to make just a small roux, but it's still not going to give you the same viscosity or that sauce consistency that you're really looking for. So, I mean, that's really going to be the biggest difference maker between someone making it at home versus someone in a restaurant that has all those ingredients readily available. It's not to say it's impossible, but you want to definitely use a good quality veal stock to do this.
And it is possible to buy pre-made stocks, like, homemade pre-made stocks, quality stocks, not box stocks or canned stocks. You can buy those these days.
And Wook,
yeah,
how big of a portion is that? Is it, because that's like John will inhale that.
Right. And that's really it. We actually just made a John serving, it's one serving. And it really depends on how much and what your appetite is, right? If you look at a short rib in itself,
right,
you could easily feed 2 people comfortably if you consider that you have the vegetables, you have the starch. But if you want to just go ultra caveman and just eat the meat, one short rib will be plenty just for one person, because you have to consider it's very fatty, it's very rich. And even if you wanted to eat more, which, I'm pretty sure anybody really could if they wanted to, you kind of feel full because of the fat.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that I like this Syrah with is its acidity to cut that fat and that glaze that inherently is on your tongue after you eat short ribs for 30, 40 minutes, and you need something to cut through that fat.
Right.
Is there any benchmark times that you have where, okay, if you have X pound of meat, you're going to want to braise that for 60 minutes per pound, like they do with turkeys, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything like that with braising?
I would say if we're going with chicken, I'll use chicken first because it's always a nice kind of introduction to braising. So if you were to do, let's just say 4 drumsticks or 2 thighs or really kind of anything in that regard. So if you wanted to do chicken per pound, I would say an hour. and
per
that will
pound.
get your chicken soft. Yeah.
I would love to see either in the chat or you guys can just raise your hands. Who here has ever braised chicken, drumsticks or thighs? I don't know if Peter's raising his hand or resting his head. No, not raising. Okay.
Linda
I didn't even know you could braise drumsticks and thighs.
Yeah.
Never even occurred to me.
And so it kind of goes back to what we were saying, and I'll give you the times for beef. But when you look at chicken, and I'm just only using chicken specifically
venison.
because it has a really nice divide, meaning you have white meat and then you have your dark meat. And it's really all about muscle composition. The dark meat has a lot more fat, it's a lot more connective tissues. So those are great to braise and stew. You can get a really nice, soft, tender product. Because if you look at the chicken breast, it's white meat and it's naturally tender. So there's really not much work that you have to do. And so
how do you determine the connective tissue, or is that just something you have to know?
Oh, it's based on the muscle. So when you look at legs and thighs, it's the amount of exercise or the amount of walking that the animal will do. And so typically when you look at, let's just say, a steer or a cow, you're going to have more connective tissue on the parts of labor. So you have your shanks, you have really where you have the most muscle utilization. That's really what's going to determine the connective tissue.
Which we would refer to as your tougher cuts of meat then. And so your
Right.
tougher cuts of meat, you need to apply typically moist heat cooking method of low and slow. Or of course, in the case of smoking, it would be low and slow with dry heat, but different technique.
Well, I want to talk about your podcast because with today being National Hand Washing Day, and
Very important.
It's funny,
I like
Martin. I was teaching a sanitation class just before our show, and I was emphasizing the hand washing.
excellent. But tomorrow is Sweetest Day. And you guys, one of your most famous episodes was the Valentine's Day episode, but you have talked to us about the podcast, and we played the intro. It's an awesome podcast. It's a ton of fun. Where is it today, and where do you want it to go?
Good question. Well, how many episodes have we done? 11?
I think so.
I think we've done 11 episodes. Basically what it comes out to is we're doing maybe one episode every 3 weeks or so. We started in July. That was sort of our goal for 2021. And it's really all about food and drink culture. We did an episode on fried rice, and we did an episode on steakhouses. We did another episode on steaks and chops.
So is it worldwide?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's international. We have a crowd in Germany.
No, I don't mean your audience.
Thailand.
I mean your topics. You talk about food and drink around the world, or food?
Yeah,
and
yeah,
drink?
yeah. Well, yeah, but it is worldwide in terms of our crowd. But of course, our topics are kind of broader food and drink topics. We did an episode on Irish coffee. And we have an up and coming one probably in about 2 weeks, which is going to be released as a taste of Thailand.
Oh, cool.
So we kind of try to cover different things that really that we're passionate about. Our most recent episode was on pies, and that was a really fun episode.
Like
Probably one of my
pies?
favorite. Pies in general, how to make a pie, what pies are consisting of. Famous we did on site two
We did
famous
yep.
pie shops in Chicago.
So for anyone that's
Baker Square.
No,
Well, we
what's
did
funny,
mention
we
it.
wanted to. I only ate Baker Square as a kid once, and I never got the satisfaction to eat it as an adult. And nobody wants to go with me. Maybe John will, but
Mhm.
I haven't asked yet.
Oh, he still wants to go to
Surprise.
Olive Garden. Chef still hasn't been to Olive Garden.
That's right.
And so I actually have to suck it up and I have to take him to Olive Garden. So no disrespect to Olive Garden fans out there, but
Chef, I see breadsticks and French silk in your future.
Man, it's funny because I've actually never went to Olive Garden, and growing up, just because of my heritage, there was just never a chance, really.
Well, John and the Chicagoans on tonight might remember that the precursor to Baker Square, the company was called Poppin' Fresh Pies.
absolutely.
And I actually had two sisters that work at Poppin' Fresh Pies going to high school, and they are not allowed to have pies stay overnight. If they don't get consumed, the staff has to take them home or they give them to shelters. So we lived on pie.
Oh my gosh.
Wonderful.
What was the hit of the pie episode?
You know what? For me, I love the key lime pie. The key lime pie, we went on site. That was my favorite pie.
Yeah. Well, he's also a fan of citrus. I mean, we did a show before that on scent, memory, and emotion. And, we're talking about like what are the most evocative scents for us personally. And his is all citrus because it's all that fresh kind of, feeling that it gives you. So it makes sense. He's a fan of key lime pie.
Exactly. Chef, what's
And
the
he's
most
teaching
sensual
sanitation.
scent? Key lime pie. I go with key lime pie.
Yeah.
I like it. You guys are awesome. It's so good to see you. It's I see, as we like to say, the harbor lights are coming into view. And so we have to bid adieu, but I can't tell you how much fun it always is learning. I learned so much tonight. Those 5 tips are incredible because I was doing all 5 wrong, which could explain a lot of my braising methods. So thank you so much. And for all of you out there, thank you for tuning in this Friday. We like to do this. We hope we do it in a manner that you appreciate and that you tell others. Lots of room inside this tent. So enjoy a great glass of wine. Be good to one another. Chef and John, thank